All right, welcome to the show. I am here with David LaDeau. What is your channel? It's Compelled Unbeliever. Yeah, I was going to say Uncompelled Believer, but that was wrong. Yeah. You hearing me, David?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right. This is the weekly show. We did miss last week. I had some major issues going on here I had to deal with and wasn't able to get back in time for the show. I apologize for that, but we got some great ones coming up. So without further ado, David LaDeau, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and I guess start with how and kind of when you left Young Earth Creationists, how long you were Young Earth Creationists.
Okay. I'm pretty much mostly known as Compelled Unbeliever. I have a YouTube channel by that name. I was indoctrinated as a young child into an extremist fundamentalist sect. It's actually the First United Methodist Church, which usually they're pretty mild in my area where I grew up. They are as fundamentalist as you get. I wanted to become a preacher at one point in time. I decided that I needed to know what God thought. There were lots of different sects with lots of different beliefs, and I knew that even though I was comfortable with my beliefs, that being that there were varying beliefs, I needed to know what God thought. And I never became a preacher because of it. Because I wanted to know what God wanted. I wanted to teach what God wanted me to teach. And until I knew that, I couldn't teach because I might be teaching the wrong things. God never spoke to me.
You had said, if you don't mind me interjecting, you had told me that, yeah, you felt like people that you knew, and through the church and things like that were experiencing, or they were saying they were being experiencing being talked to by God and things, but you never ever felt that. That's right.
Right. It was very, very strong cultural thing for people to just walk up randomly, oh, well, God told me this, and God is doing this in my life, and so forth. It was kind of like a show and tell. And as a kid, that really affected me very negatively because, well, frankly, I knew a lot of people were lying. The reason is they would say, well, God told me to do this, and they went and did it, and it did not work out at all. And I was like, well, maybe that wasn't God after all. Maybe that was just you wanting it to be true. And I didn't want to be that guy that just wanted it to be true and therefore believed it. I wanted to know it was true, whatever God was saying or doing or whatever else. And I was kind of skeptical, I guess, even as a child in that respect, but I was a very, very firm believer. Very firm believer. I just realized that people are human and not necessarily always honest. And I want to start with the kind of give an idea of the culture that I grew up in. The school system where I live is controlled by the fundamentalist. So we were not taught science. And my children, they're now 18 and 19. They experienced the same thing I did. And they just graduated. So our school boasts of natural sciences and so forth, such as, the health sciences and so forth. But if any science in any way conflicts with the fundamentalist talking points, line of thinking, they simply will not teach it. So I was never really taught science. The basics in chemistry, very basics in biology, very basics in the scientific method, but the classes just aren't available. There's no astronomy. There's nothing that has anything to do with taxonomy or evolution, or even earth sciences are avoided because that gets into geology, and geology is bad. Geology is really bad. We don't talk about that.
Now, you were rural Colorado, is that correct? Or?
Yes. I don't mind saying where. I live in Kansas City, Colorado.
Okay.
It's the center of Colorado, essentially. south center of Colorado, and it's just very, 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 very fundamentalist.
Well, similar to Oregon, like, I lived in Oregon for a while, and people sometimes they think of Colorado, they think of Colorado Springs, they think of Denver, places that might be more liberal, because maybe the big cities tend to be liberal, just like Portland, Oregon tends to be very liberal, but rural Oregon is not liberal at all. It's
Once you get
right
away from the coast, or Eugene, or maybe Bend, all those areas are really liberal. If you go west at all, even like 20 miles west of the coast, and sometime maybe 30 miles, it's all of a sudden conservative country. And that's what this is too. Colorado is known for being extremely liberal. However, when you get into the rural areas, it's a completely different story. So I did not learn science as a kid. It was actually years after I came to the realization that God does not exist that I even began to look into science. And that was only after I got involved in the atheist movement, when I started reading Dawkins and so forth. Bill Nye wrote a great book. It was only then that I began to understand science. And when I did, I started to study it just to understand the arguments, to understand what was real, and why what I was taught as a child was bunk. Or maybe it wasn't. I didn't care. Once again,
I just want to thank you for the super chat. I can't pronounce the name. RJ, I guess. So we'll go with RJ. All right. Go on.
But I've always been of the mind that I don't care what the facts are, but I want to work with the facts, whatever they are, whether good or bad or anything else. So I know you're going to ask basically how.
Well, when did you begin to really doubt what you were taught? I mean, what was it? Was it after you were out of high school? And
I went in the military very, very young at 17, and I was exposed to a lot of different things and a lot of different people. Yeah. But what got me the most was when I ran into other fundamentalists that no matter what, they were right. And even if they quoted something that was completely off, and I could show them in the Bible that it was completely off, then they didn't care. And once again, I was wondering if maybe I'm that bad. Maybe I'm wrong too, and I just think I'm right. And that's when I literally stepped away from the entire Christian movement, because I didn't want to be so pompous as to quote, no, I was right because these are my beliefs. I wanted to know what the correct beliefs were. And so I went into a lot of private study. I probably read the Bible, and I'm not kidding you, straight through at least 50 times. And I don't know how many versions.
Wow.
And that was, and I study it every day, even to this day. More so is to educate Christians. I get in some funny conversations where they'll say, somebody will ask me a question or something about the Bible or whatever, and I have to ask them what their religion is so that I can tell them what they believe. No, not personally, but okay, if you're a Baptist, you believe this is what Baptists believe. If you're a Catholic, you think that according to your religion, you may not believe this, but you are literally eating the flesh and literally drinking the blood of Christ. You are a cannibal of God. You're eating your God. No, I don't believe it. Well, okay, that's fine. You don't have to, but that is what your religion believes. And so when you have to start with educating people about their own religion, it's really hard to even have a conversation. Particularly when you're getting into young earth creation, or ideas, it's now called. There is, I'm sure you're fairly familiar with that story. It was called Young Earth Creation. Aaron Ra has a great video, and he discusses this. But essentially, there was a lawsuit. I think it was in '84, maybe '87, somewhere in there.
You're talking about in Pennsylvania, the intelligent design, Kitzmiller versus Dover, or
I think so. But long story short,
those are different people than Young Earth Creationists, though. I mean,
long story short, and Aaron Ra has proof of this. He could show it to you. They got the same exact book.
Oh yeah.
They lost the lawsuit where it said creation, and they just put intelligent design in the place of creation and tried to push it right back into the school systems.
Of Pandas and People was the book, and that's where we had the C design proponents or whatever, where they took creationists and put design proponents and were copying and pasting in the original files when they reprinted it. And one time they didn't copy and paste over the whole thing, and so everybody jokes about it. I mean, it was so obvious proof of what they've done right there.
And so the thing is I grew up, my science education was through my church. There's a I cannot remember what the museum's called now. It's in Glen Rose, Texas. The Creation Science Museum is what it used to be called. And
Carl Baugh, or what it was, it's his museum down there. Yeah.
Yes, and he had all kinds of sources in the 80s and everything else. But the problem is in the 80s when you're researching, you can see the footnotes, but actually finding the sources was impossible. And now actually you can't even find those sources on the internet. Because basically they've been debunked so much that it's no longer applicable. It's not even an argument they wish to make. A lot of the arguments they meant, like the moon dust and so forth, the footprints, we know exactly how those footprints got there. I'm talking about the human footprints that are, quote, beside the dinosaur prints. Well, that was hoax, and we know it was.
Right. And the Delk print, and then there's the other Paluxy tracks there too that were, it's all been debunked, and but they still promote it. It's like he promotes the London Hammer there at that museum. He's the one that purchased that. No one has ever tested it.
But since I grew up in a microculture, there is a lot of things you get. I want to talk a little bit about the psychology, because I frankly, I'm not really good at the sciences. I'm just now having to learn now, and I do study frequently now. But when you're ignorant, completely ignorant, and kept ignorant by the church and by your community and by your school, whatever is thrown in front of you, you're going to believe. And when the church is telling you this, you're not only questioning your church, but you're questioning God. So if the church is saying, yes, the earth is 8,000 years old or 6,000 to 8,000 years old, if you question that, you're questioning God,
right? Which
is like one of the biggest sins. So it's something you literally put out of your mind. There's also groupthink, a social acceptance. If you don't accept that, then you're going to be ostracized or condemned by your peer group.
Yeah, and we talked about that with both of my previous guests. Are both from rural areas, and it is the church is a huge part of your social community and your social life, and the thought of being ostracized. If you no longer believe that, and you no longer want to attend the church, I mean, you can literally lose almost all your social life and your
job.
Oh, that's true.
Get a job.
Yeah.
I know people in Utah that are not Mormon. If you're not Mormon, you're going to have a hard time getting work. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, especially in rural. Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot of pressure to not want to investigate. Now, interestingly, in my case, I was probably about 27, somewhere in there, early 30s. It wasn't any particular epiphany or anything. But I realized that the Christian God for sure did not exist. And then I came to the point that I don't think there's any God that exists and I didn't investigate any other religions because there was no reason to. If there was an actual God that was clearing hospitals, if someone could pray to one God and he would heal people, everybody'd know it. It would be very obvious. If God wanted us to know things, then we simply would. So,
well, in your story, we briefly talked a bit before, yesterday we did a little test run and stuff. And the thing that just really surprised me is you're probably the only person I know who, you were, but again, it comes from you really not having been taught science other than what you learned from the church, or religious side. You actually left the religion before you left the young earth.
I was an atheist, a self-admitted atheist. It took me about another 15 years to admit it in public, which is another story. But for a decade, at least a decade after I realized that I did not believe that there is a God, I still believed in young earth creationism. I believed in intelligent design. Okay, I know that sounds ridiculous. I won't say I believed in intelligent design, but I did believe that Earth was very young. And it was due to my disinformation. I was brainwashed. I was literally brainwashed. And I didn't even know it. I didn't know any better.
One thing in particular that struck you that changed your mind when it came to that? I mean, you obviously started looking into it. Was it geology? Was it cosmology? Was there any field of science in particular that helped you understand the Earth isn't 6,000 years old?
I say this a lot of times, and I'm very misunderstood when I say this. I don't need science to disbelieve in God. I have a Bible. Actually, I have probably about 30 of them. I read my Bible. So let's look at this from a non-scientific perspective so you can understand where I came from. In Genesis, it's very, very confusing. Adam and Eve are created twice. The earth and the stars and the waters, everything's created in different orders. Why? And why is it so confusing? Okay, first question is, if God was real and thought this was important to us to know and understand, then I think he would have made it clear. But he did not make it clear. So that makes me think, okay, well then if God didn't make it clear, in fact, he made it extremely confusing, probably written by men. So when you get into biblical scholarship, and I consider myself an amateur biblical scholar and amateur historian, which means I don't get paid for it and I do not have a formal education, but I do have about 30 years of intensive study. So when we look at Genesis, one thing, and I tried to look this up and I cannot find a link to anything that's very clear because it doesn't fit the Christian talking points or what they would like to think. And when you search anything related to Christianity on Google, it's a search engine that's specifically geared towards what is most popular. So you're not going to find the very intense scholarly works. But in Genesis, we have two separate accounts from two different people. And we know this for a fact. And in fact, they teach it in seminary. So we have two different accounts. So what the Jews thought at the time was all scrolls are sacred and we cannot alter or change them. But we have these two different accounts. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut and paste them together and make a mega story out of it. So when those two stories are separated out, one's called the J, which is the Elohim tradition, and the other one is called the priestly tradition, which is the Yahweh tradition. And that's one of the ways that we separate those out. You have two very, very nice stories that make sense, that don't contradict themselves. Okay, so when a creationist wants to say, well, Genesis says this, and this, and we have young earth, blah, blah. Okay, which account? which story are you talking about? That's my first question. Well, they don't have any idea what the hell I'm talking about at all. They just have no clue. And so that shows you the type of ignorance that you're dealing with. And I wasn't aware of this until, years after I was an atheist, because it was then that I went outside of the Bible and outside of the text to understand the Bible and the history and so forth. So to answer your question, once I understood that it was folklore, it was a story, and what's important about those two accounts is they are different enough that both cannot be true. So if both cannot be true, one is a lie, to be horrible and phrasing it, or maybe neither one are true. But God could not have given us a factual account when the two accounts are different. Are you following me there? So later on, as we get to studying the ages, the way that the earth was figured up, and it was, oh gosh, I can't remember who the fellow was. And he was a priest. And basically he tried to add up and guesstimate all the ages of all the people and the generations and so forth. And he came up with a date. I think it was, I can't remember the date, what it was. I want to say 1400, but 1404 BC or something like that. But I don't think that's correct.
For which?
Anywhere close. I can't remember what the date was that he came up with. Oh, was it 4004 BC or something like that?
Usher. Yeah, about 6,020 years ago, but yeah.
Okay, so
on a Tuesday at 6 p.m.
The interesting thing here is the Bible does not say anything about a young earth. This is extrapolation from guesstimation of ages of people that were supposedly living 600 years and so forth, or 400 years, and there's a lot of them. So if we look at the genealogies and we go all the way to Matthew versus John, I believe, and we have or Mark versus John, we have the two genealogies, and they aren't right. They don't jive with one another. Once again, this is God's book. They should jive. If God thought it was important for us enough for us to know these genealogies, then I think he would have put the effort into getting them right. So since we know God's word is not right in the New Testament, we can't actually trust the Old Testament either in their genealogies, because God didn't see it fit to be accurate in his information. So if there is a real God, then obviously that wouldn't happen. So once again, this was written by men. You see my line of thinking?
Different men, yeah.
Yeah, many different men.
Yeah.
And with many different opinions. Like I said, there was the Elohim tradition and the Yahweh tradition. Those are different authors from different times worshiping different gods. Literally worshiping different gods. Similar gods, like the Elohim is El, the Canaanite god. The Yahweh is more of the tribal warfare god that later evolved into the Israelite and Judaic traditions. And those were all merged into one. So I didn't need science at all. I just needed to understand the Bible. So now I'm at the point where, okay, I know the information that I've gotten here on the young earth creation through the genealogies and through the accounts themselves are not accurate. Therefore, I can no longer accept a young earth for sure until I investigate it. And it was then that I started reading Dawkins and so forth, more for other reasons. It was axillary. I didn't care. I'll be honest with you. I didn't care. But once I actually started seeing the facts and understanding geology, there are some channels on YouTube now that are just so amazing that really explain the layers of the earth and explain how a world flood is impossible. And the argument for a world flood is, okay, in evolution, we have more, every single science that I know of confirms evolution almost every day with the new discoveries. Every science there is, in one way or another, somehow applies, and it confirms evolution every day. But it's kind of like saying that gravity doesn't exist. The interesting thing is we have very, very little proof for gravity. Yes, we can drop a pencil. That's a proof. We know that the time-space continuum is affected by gravity, and that, like when our astronauts go into space, they come back to Earth younger than they would have been because time is slower out in space. So when we're looking at all these different types of scientific evidences, just for gravity,
Well, I think we understand evolution better than we do a lot of things like gravity. Yeah.
no, we don't know why necessarily. We understand how it works in a lot of respects, but we don't actually have a lot of proofs for it. We can drop a pencil. Okay, that's a proof. We can understand with the theory of relativity, understand a little bit more about gravity, but we really, we only have a handful of proofs for gravity.
And we've only really begun to understand it for a little over 100 years.
So what the young Earth creationists are trying to do is say that gravity doesn't exist, is what I'm saying. Whereas with evolution, there is almost no science that doesn't, or I don't know of any science that doesn't confirm it in one way or another. You see what I'm saying? We have an immense, the evolution will never be disproven. It can't be, just like gravity can't be. And they don't understand that because they're indoctrinated to think. I was told that it was Satan, that Satan trying to confuse me and so forth. And I did mention this to you before. The church kind of did too good of a job on me. I was over indoctrinated. They always warned me and so forth to beware of secular science and so forth. Like, I love that term, secular science. It's freaking science. It doesn't care
right
about being secular or non-secular. It just wants to facts.
You have children and family. I mean, how did it affect that? Your children were raised the same way you were. I mean, are they still?
Let me finish this one point real quick.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Now I just totally forgot where I was going. I'll remember in a little bit.
We were talking about gravity and science didn't care about secular being,
Right. So what their arguments are is arguments of ignorance. And I was so indoctrinated that they told me not to go outside of the church or whatever to investigate science or evolution or anything else. I would be confused. Well, I was of the mindset that I had God on my side, and God was going to protect me no matter what, and all sciences would lead to God and would prove God. So what did I have to fear? I thought they were just wimps. So once I did start looking at things a little bit, I had a very different picture from what I was raised as, what I was indoctrinated in. And so because I was over indoctrinated, I was fearless of the truth, is what I'm saying. I was fearless of the facts. And that actually probably is the biggest factor that actually led me to become an atheist. I was so convinced that I was fearless. And then the facts did not jive, particularly when I read the Bible. So to address my kids, I never went to church. My wife did not go to church. My kids, thankfully, were raised by my ex-wife and I. We just got divorced, but
Hmm.
the kids grew all the way up in a single family home with both parents, and I'm happy about that. Um, she proclaimed to be a Christian, didn't care about it that much. Um, I Nobody ever asked me if I was a Christian because I would have told them, but I never wanted to tell them I was an atheist. I would have been honest if they had asked, and everybody thought I was a super Christian because I was studying the Bible so much.
Hmm.
And they would ask me questions about the Bible, and I would give them the question that they wanted to hear or accurate answers. But I wouldn't go into, yeah, but this is bunk because I would just get into this is what the Bible says. That's what you want to know. So my kids grew up in the same school system and so forth, but luckily, I don't even know what their generation is, but the Generation X and Generation Z and whatever the heck they are, things have changed significantly, particularly with the internet and so forth. Very few kids in that school system now are actually Christian. My kids, believe it or not, they wanted to go to church. My daughter did specifically. And so guess what I did? I took them to church. I took them to church, and they if they had questions or whatever, I would answer them. They knew I was an atheist, but after going to church and so forth, I just wanted them to see for their own what these people believed, that these were real people, and that they did truly believe that. And I told them flat out, you don't have to respect anything about their beliefs, but
Hmm.
you damn well better respect them as human beings and
Sure.
understand them as human beings. And so I took them to church, and I even told the preacher I was an atheist and why I was taking them to church.
Well, are you telling me, wasn't there an incident at school with your son?
Yes, his teacher, he said, "Oh my God," in class for some reason. And his teacher said, "Oh, don't say that. You're a Christian." And he looked at her and said, "I'm an atheist." So she sent him to the principal's office.
Wow.
And that's when I actually came out as an atheist because I was not going to put up with that. I did question my son. He was 14 at the time, and I drilled him about 20 minutes until finally he cursed at me, which basically is like, "I'm tired of this shit, Dad." And
What 14-year-old hasn't done that?
well, the thing is I knew then that he actually did not believe because I wouldn't know if he was just being a smartass acting out or if he just didn't believe. Once I figured out he actually didn't believe, I told him, "No, I don't either." And I went to his defense at the school. This is the same school that we get Jesus Pizza from. It's a very, very, I'm trying to think of the word. It has quite a history with religion and so forth. And the school board is controlled by the fundamentalist. So they did not get a proper education. My son, I was very, very happy he did learn the word taxonomy. But that was the only thing he'd ever heard of concerning anything concerning paleontology or anything.
All right, we got to take this question because I had to ask you the same thing when you briefly mentioned this to me. So once.
Oh, what's
Jesus Pizza? Yeah.
Okay, so heck, I'll say his name. My friend Randy Paff, who is a preacher here at Cowboy Church. I've known him for a lot of years. He decided to start bringing pizza to school, and he would just give it away to whoever wanted it, and I didn't mind it too much. Basically, he said, if you want to pray or hear what I have to say later over to the side, great. And nobody had a problem with that. There was a Jewish teacher that was a true Jewish teacher, and he had to walk through this prayer group to get into the school. And he said, "Look, this looks like it's promoting Christianity." If you look up Jesus Pizza, if you Google it, you'll probably pull it up. Our Canyon City School, or put Jesus Pizza in high school, and it'll pull up. It was a big deal. It did make national.
So he would lure children with pizza in, but they had to agree with him in order to stay.
Well,
Pizza, is that kind of how it went, or
no,
at least had to listen to him? I mean,
no, you didn't actually even have to listen.
Oh,
To him.
okay.
You could get the pizza and cruise. He just said, if you want to hear what I want to say after we eat over the side, that's fine. And I didn't have a problem with that because no one was being excluded. However, the Jewish teacher did feel that it was promoting the idea of Christianity.
Sure.
Because there are no other groups. As an atheist, my position was, okay, yes, he has a point, but I don't know that there were any other groups that attempted to have any school programs or anything like that. Now, if the school had said no to the Satanic Temple or something, then I would have been all over it.
All right.
I certainly understand that teacher for feeling a little bit uncomfortable with that, feeling that his religion wasn't being spoken of or whatever. And he actually did not make a big deal out of that in class. If a kid would ask, he would tell them, these are my beliefs, and move on. So.
All right. How do I get this off of there now? Did it have pineapple on it?
I have no idea.
Okay. I'll find it. I'm just keep going. I'm trying to find the way to click that off of there.
So what is really
find it.
A shame right now is I am actually having to learn science, and I will push Aaron Ra all day long. He has a great channel, the fundamental falsehoods of creationism. And there's another one, if someone can help me out in side chat, another wonderful series where he talks about taxonomy and explains from the very beginning.
He's got the whole phylogeny thing, you know.
Yes.
Yeah. That was still going to be like my next question. Were there any particular atheists that were influential on your decision to leave either both YEC or theism behind? And how did you find out about them? I mean, was it reading books? Was it YouTube? Was it somewhere else on the internet? I mean, how? Okay,
so I read the Bible, and there was no atheist community, no one that would even admit they're an atheist. In fact, I truly believe that the atheists that you saw on Fox News were haters. If there was an atheist that was outspoken and made the news, they were just haters. And I didn't want anything to do with them, although I realized I didn't believe in God either. But I just thought they were crazy because that's how they were presented on the news. It wasn't, and I would already been an atheist for at least a decade, maybe 15 years. It wasn't until my son got in trouble at school, immediately I figured there could be some major problems with that school system. So I got a hold of the American Atheist and the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And the funny thing is I sent a letter to the principal at the time. Like, you got to understand, I was completely clueless. I'm embarrassed to say this now, but it's really funny. I told the principal at the school that he better back off of my son and get that teacher to back off of my son, or I was going to send every atheist hate group that I could find after him. After that school system, and make national news. And he immediately dropped off. Well, and I did not realize, and I took a cursory look at the American Atheist. I saw these lawsuits. So I was like, yeah, a bunch of haters. And I didn't even look at it. It wasn't until my wife actually made me come out of the closet. Because between me, my son, and the principal. But as soon as she found out about it, she had a cow and decided to go tell all of our friends and everyone that we knew I was an atheist. Well, I was out, and I couldn't help it. It wasn't my doing. I couldn't help it. I had to admit it to her. And once she did that, I was like, okay, I'm out. I went to AN and started our Atheist Nexus, a great website, and met a few people, and a friend of mine recommended Bionic Dance, and I love Kate. I've actually modeled my channel, a lot of how I do things after her, but I started watching her videos, and I watched them for about 3 years. And of course, you get recommendations for everybody else as you're watching that type of thing. And then that's when I started to get introduced to the atheist community and realize that, what, these aren't a bunch of haters. They're not denying young Earth. They just know it's not true, and they have science to prove it. But by this time, I was already convinced, and I was more on the biblical scholarship side. So it was very, very easy for me to just realize that I had been misled. Now, one thing I wanted to that I was trying to tell you when we talked before that I think is very interesting. I challenge and I encourage everyone and anyone, just go on YouTube and put young Earth creation or intelligent design, where it's put anything where it's wrong or anything, and try to find preachers talking about it, presentations, lectures from Christians. It's very, very important to get it from Christians, not atheists, not scientists, Christians. The reason is there's many camps of young Earth creation. Now, I was hardcore word for word Bible literalist, which, once again, if you look at Genesis, you can't be a Bible literalist because they conflict. But I believed it anyway. But if you listen to their arguments, what they do constantly is they will discount science. If you want to bring up that slide, we can talk about that a little bit.
Do that, definitely.
Aaron Ra has been great about, he lists, I think it's something like 20 or 30 organizations. And in any intelligent design organizations, they flatly will say, if science conflicts with our beliefs, we will defer. It does not align with the Bible, so therefore we will believe in the Bible. So that is like the most dishonest position one can have. I don't care if the facts are true. I'm going to believe in the Bible.
Right. Well, they start with the Bible. They start with word for word what the Bible says, and then they go on to say, by definition, no apparent, perceived, or claimed evidence in any field, including history and chronology. I mean, they're talking all of science, too, can be valid if it contradicts the scriptural record. So, I mean, basically, we're going to start with what we believe in, and we have to reject any evidence that doesn't agree with that. And
so then, where I want to go with this is they will flatly reject science if it conflicts with their intelligent design beliefs. Like you have the people who believe that there was a billion years on the first day, or a trillion years, whatever you want to call it. So the people who believe that, they will throw down the science and accept it immediately if it makes the point against a 7 literal Earth days. But then if you go to the other camp that they believe in a 7 literal Earth days, they will show you and accept all of the science that shows that that's not possible either. So actually, where you get the best arguments, and this applies to anything in Christianity, theology, the best, most prolific is in the area of evolution. They do better at debunking each other than any atheist could. And their information is actually good information when they're debunking each other.
Old Earth creationists versus young Earth creationists, I mean, and they both have their flaws, but it's funny because when it comes to Neanderthals, young Earth creationists believe they were no different than us, human, Homo sapiens, basically. I mean, just the same as us, just descended from Adam and Eve, etc. Where old Earth creationists will say that they're a separate creation. They are part of the animal kingdom, and that they're no different than a chimpanzee or an orangutan. So they're both wrong. there's different ways, but they don't agree with each other. It's not just the time. It's not just that one believes it took millions or billions of years. There's some fundamental differences in the way they interpret or the way they present, especially human evolution or the lack of. Yeah.
Well, you know, the interesting thing, and I know this is probably a horrible thing for me to say, but when I talk to people that believe in young Earth, you know, evolution can't happen, and I just look at them and say, okay, do you look exactly like your mother and father? Do your children look exactly like you? Oh, yes, but we're still humans. Of course they look different. But we're still human. But that's a change.
It's variation, you know. I mean, evolution doesn't happen in one generation, but
they also don't understand. Okay, there's one mistake, and we're going to see a huge change in this very quickly. There was kind of the storyline. It was kind of came from scientists, and now it's actually been debunked that evolution takes a very, 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 very long time. And that's completely not true. And we're getting evidences of these every single day, that it can happen very rapidly within 50, 100 years, very rapidly. That there are significant changes that happen. Like Bill Nye discusses in his book, The Mosquitoes in the London Subways. The only reason that those are not considered the same species as what's above ground is because in the lab, 1 in 20 times they can make them reproduce. And so they're not considered a different species yet. They're considered a subspecies, but probably in the next 10 years that will change. But there's plenty of examples of rapid evolution.
What they call macroevolution, I mean, above speciation still requires time. I mean, but what we find out is it can be sped up immensely by catastrophic events or geological, you know, geographical isolation, you know,
which leads to intervention of man, such as the silver foxes.
But that's artificial selection. But yeah, I mean, but we see how that can happen. So
one thing that annoys me also, and I'm not going to contribute here a lot, but I like your thoughts on this. Let's look at the color spectrum for a moment. So in the color spectrum, you have actually, you can pull up your little test pattern there if you want to. In the color spectrum, we have red and blue, right? If we look at this from an evolutionary perspective, say these are two different species, say Homo sapiens and Homo erectus, right? Between red and blue. Well, in the color spectrum, there's a lot of variation between the two. And you can even make it more complex because are you going to count tone, sharpness, tint, saturation, and so forth? What my question is, what is blue? What is red? So even if we say, make a definitive definition, this is the true red, this is the true blue, where's the missing link? I want that missing link.
Well, with evolution, they both start off as the same color. Then, you know, one starts getting a little shade of a different color, the other gets a little shade of a different, and it's a gradual process.
In other words,
sometimes it can happen fairly fast. I mean, if they're completely isolated.
What my point is there was not a Homo erectus that had a child that was a Homo sapien.
Correct. Yeah.
You cannot pinpoint any particular in time when it became Homo sapien as opposed to Homo erectus. But what you can show is that, okay, we know this is Homo erectus, we know this is Homo sapien, and these are the distinguishing differences. There is no such thing as a missing link. It's a continuing population, is what my point is. And the creationists, they are of the mind that God made a giraffe, God made an elephant, God made a human. And if you're going to show me evolution, and if we did evolve, there has to be a missing link. Well, it's like purple is between red and blue. Is that a missing link? Well, maybe if you want to call it that, but it's a continuation of the spectrum.
It's with all, like, say, all the new discoveries in human evolution, or sometimes it's not even new discoveries, it's redating or reclassifying something that had been discovered. You take a look at the humans that were, I think, originally assumed to be 150, 160,000 years old in northern Africa, like in Morocco, which was reclassified to just over 300,000 years old, redating and that from their initial discovery. And now they're calling that the earliest Homo sapiens. Well, it's just a random thing where we're drawing the line. I mean, they still have archaic features. They still have features of Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus. They don't have a modern human skull. Nobody can say that they're modern humans, that they're anatomically modern humans. It's just wherever someone decides to draw that line and start calling the transition Homo sapiens. So I would personally classify them as Homo sapiens. I don't know. I mean, I think that
my point here is with a young Earth creationist that was educated or had a lack of education, as I did, you always hear the missing link thing. That's the argument. There's no missing link. And once you're in that mindset, you don't see that color spectrum. You don't see that there is no such thing as a missing link, or that every single thing that we do find is a link in that chain, no matter what it is. So
I like that comment.
Right, exactly. You're right, absolutely, Edwin. But the reason I want to talk about this is that's what we're trying to overcome here. That no matter what, even after you explain, okay, evolution is a thing, it's here, there's still going to be that deep-seated missing link type of mentality until they understand that we are a spectrum, that we are continuing to evolve, that I'm not the same as my parents. Yes, I'm the same species, but there has been change. I'm genetically altered. I'm mutated. I could not reproduce my parents. My parents will never be there. They cannot be reproduced. Maybe cloned or something, but their evolution is over. Mine has just begun and has continued through my children. Does it mean we're a different species? No. Does it mean that we have slightly genetic changes? Yes. But a young Earth creationist or an intelligent designer is not going to understand that. They're not going to be able to even comprehend that because they've been too brainwashed, too far, and you've got to really take baby steps. They have to understand the process before they can understand the reality.
Right. Yeah, here's a good question. How come Answers in Genesis put extinct organisms like ceratopsians into a kind when they can't tell if they interbred, but dismiss hominid fossils because we can't prove they're all related? Yeah, it's the truth. I mean, we look more like Neanderthals. Of course, they do classify us as the same as Neanderthals, but they don't classify, let's say, Homo erectus as human. So we look more like Homo erectus than two different ceratopsians, in a lot of different ways. I'm
fully convinced that if we were to make a Neanderthal, a duplicate, somehow clone it or something, and give it a nice haircut and put it in modern day clothes, and the fellow walked down the street, that no one would be able to tell the difference. That you would just look a lot more burly and have a little bit larger brow. But I mean, I've seen some pretty Neanderthal looking fellows myself, and
I think I could, because I know what to look for. It wasn't just the brow ridge, and a lot of young creationists get so hung up on.
Oh yeah, well, the skull ridge.
And there are some, but Neanderthals typically had a continuous brow ridge, not two separate ridges. They lacked really a forehead, receding or no chin, wider skull in the back, which means they had a really wide necks, shorter, and their arms and legs. It's the lower portion of the leg is what was shorter and made up for the difference, mostly in height difference. So if you knew what to look like, even if he was in a business suit, I bet I could pick out.
I'm sure you could, but the average.
But a lot of people probably could.
The average person just think that's a funny looking fella.
What we do see today is some modern humans that do have, some traits we would consider Neanderthal. We just don't see someone with all those traits.
I have some friends that I would love to have their DNA tested because I'm pretty sure they've got more than most. But it could just be a random genetic thing too.
Here's a question for you. What do you think about seeing people like Ken Ham giving lectures to children? Were you there? Have you seen some of his lectures where he compares? He'll put up on the screen an ape, a chimpanzee, and say, dressed up with a hat and a mustache. Was this your grandfather? And then they put a dress. Was this your grandmother? And having them learn to repeat, were you there? And things like that. Have you? I don't know if you've really seen those type of videos before where he's done that or not.
First of all, BJ, I love you, and you know it. I've known BJ actually since I first came out as an atheist, and she's seen me grow, and I love you dearly, and you know it. Frankly, it makes me sick. It literally, I have some traits of an empath and so forth, but literally seeing that makes me physically ill to my stomach. The reason is, I know it's indoctrination. He knows he's lying. He knows he's full of crap. I've studied the man for long enough. He knows the facts, but chooses to ignore them. When he is bombarded in debate after debate with the facts and continues to ignore them and use terms like kind when he's talking about science, he is being willfully dishonest. He is flatly lying. I don't know how else to put that, and I don't like to be that harsh on people, but it is simply the facts. And it makes me sick that anyone would do that to anyone. Because like I said before, I don't care what the facts are. I want to know what the facts are and work with them. So I mean, yeah, it soured my mood when BJ even asked that question. Love you, BJ.
Right. There's Ken Ham right there, huh? So, yeah, at what point did he become fully human? So,
well, the first time I saw Ken Ham, that was exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
And I know that's where this
someone that argues against evolution look unevolved.
But I've had experiences with my mother. I spent probably 3 hours about a year ago, explaining to her evolution. And at the end of the conversation, all she could say is, "I ain't no monkey." And I looked at her and I said, "You're right. You're an ape."
S. Glubel has been trolling. Mr. Glubel. There's no way to explain butterfly metamorphosis through gradual change. There actually is, and there's some really good scientific papers on that explain it. And the original insect was probably a lot like the larva. The later stages were probably, it changes, but there's ways to do it. I can't really get into all of it here, but because I'm not super familiar with it, but there's some great articles that explain metamorphosis. The question I would have to say is, why would a God make an animal go through stages like that? Is it really necessary? We know that it conserves energy. If they have to change from the pupal form is very energy conserving. They're doing a lot right then. They're using their energy to change, morph, inside that. And that's why they're protected. There's all kinds of evolutionary reasons why that would happen. But
so even though I'm not the scientist guy, I would like to touch on that question. Mm-hmm. One needs to study the history of sex. And Bill Nye does a wonderful job in his book, and I can't remember the title of it, of explaining sex. Also, Aaron Raw does a very, very great job of explaining sex. So when we think of sex, we think boy-girl, and they get together, copulate, and there is babies. That's not how sex works in most of the world. When you have funguses, they can have thousands of genders. There are certain animals like worms and so forth that are unisexual. That we did not just have sex. We weren't human beings when sex came about as we understand it. We weren't even the primitest of mammals at that time. It had a lot to do with exchanging DNA and getting together and exchanging or sharing DNA that actually almost became like one entity in some respects, and then they would split and so forth, and that would make the other cell or the other entity, which it would again share with another one, that DNA, it was split, so forth. And that was the original sex. And I'm really butchering this bad, but it had more to do with metamorphosis type of issues than actually a male-female population having sex. That is not how we evolved. It did not exist. It was much more complicated than that.
That split came way back too. I mean, we're talking way back in our evolutionary history, and having a male and female sex. I mean, if you want to get greater variation among a population, you don't want something constantly reproducing itself. You want two things out there that are slightly different, that are mating and creating something that's a combination thereof, and that one mates with this one. That's how natural selection takes over, and that variation.
When we're talking to intelligent designers, they have this mindset: a man, woman, Adam and Eve. And they had a family and they reproduced and had sex with each other, or whatever their story is. But what they don't understand is that it is not what happened. There were populations of humanoid creatures that evolved into other humanoid creatures that evolved to other humanoid creatures, but massive populations, or 10,000 millions of populations, not a single. In fact, I don't even think it's possible if you got, say, two dogs. You only had two dogs on the planet, and you tried to breed those two to keep the species going. I'm pretty sure by about the fifth generation, they would all be dead. Because with that kind of inbreeding, they're going to literally kill themselves. That's why the Brits have so many problems in the royal family, and the Egyptians had so many problems in their royal family, was because they were so inbred, and they almost inbred themselves to the point where they could no longer breed. And it was more to politics and so forth that those dynasties survived. But if they had had their way, they would have literally bred themselves into non-existence. But we're dealing with populations, not a boy, girl, have kids, and the I don't know, mom had, or parents have sex with the children, and the children have sex with each other, and thus we have a population. Not how it worked at all. It could not work that way.
Right. Patrick has a good question. Are we direct descendants of Homo erectus, or do we have a common ancestor?
Yes.
We believe they're ancestral to us, but not necessarily the only, but Homo erectus was around a long time. And right now, we have variation as much as these 5 different Demonese skulls that are all grouped into Homo erectus. We have what's called Homo ergaster, that some call Homo ergaster in Africa, and some split it into Homo erectus in Asia. But others call it all Homo erectus. I mean, they were alive at the same time. They lasted well over 1.5 million years. So
let me try to put this into perspective. Let's take your Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. We both had a common ancestor of common ancestor of common ancestors, but they were so close that we were actually able to breed with the Homo or the Neanderthals. And as we've discussed, we know scientifically that most people have something like 1 to 3%,
up to 4 if you're non-African.
Yeah, right. So I answer this question yes. The reason is I believe, I don't know if I think Neanderthals were direct descendants of the previous the predecessor of Homo erectus.
Well, no, you got it backwards. Homo heidelbergensis is generally considered in between, but we do not know if Homo erectus, like in Asia, if we were able to mate with and have successful offspring with Homo sapiens when we arrive. However, there is a mystery population out there that we see. We have Neanderthal, Denisovan, and people in Asia also have this other mystery human, early human, that we don't know what it is yet. Could it have been that Neanderthals also were able to mate with Homo erectus because they split sooner than we did, but still close enough? And so possibly there were archaic, or not archaic, but late Homo erectus that could interbreed with us in Asia. It's possible. We see evidence in the genome of something.
I want to answer this question and correct me if I'm wrong, because I am scientific idiot here. But as I understand it, are we direct descendants of Homo erectus, or do we just have a common ancestor? And the answer to my question is yes, maybe both.
Yeah, I mean, I would say
enough information to decisively.
I don't think common ancestor is good, because before that, if you're looking at Homo habilis or Australopithecus, we didn't split off back then. We split off long after Homo erectus was around. So we are direct descendants, I'm sure, of some population they're calling Homo erectus. But again, the scientific community doesn't all agree on are these all Homo erectus? Are the African ones Homo erectus and not the Asians? But definitely within our chain and on the family tree, for sure. Am I missing anything? Let me see what that question was. And then
see, a lot of this I've even been studying in the last few weeks. It is just so very, very difficult with since we have such a hard time getting DNA samples and so forth, but we're getting better and better, and we are going to answer a lot of these questions as time goes on.
Looking for more questions. All right.
Just think there are some people who have DNA from 3 species in them.
Yeah, there are people that have Denisovan and Neanderthal, and then of course there are Homo sapiens now. So we find that in Southeast Asia, down that area, but we don't find it. The Africans still have the most genetic diversity. 2 people in the same tribe in Africa can be more genetically diverse than someone from Japan and someone from Great Britain.
Basically, most Caucasians, genetically speaking, we're all inbreds.
Yeah, we don't have the full genome because our group left.
They got isolated.
Africa and became isolated from the others. And while the ones still in Africa maintained their diversity.
And we just became super isolated and very inbred.
Yeah, not always inbred, but not us.
Comparatively.
Yeah.
Genetically speaking.
We got any last minute questions here? I'm going to tell just quick about somebody had sent me a link to a guy named Dean Sessions. He's got a whole new thing about the origin of the universe here. And what's it called? The universal model. This guy, he's a young earth creationist, but he's wacky even for them. He's got this whole universal model thing going on, but he's local to me here. He's in the Phoenix area, and he actually went up to a road cut on the near the base of the Mogollon Rim, about an hour and a half from here, and sat there and filmed at this road cut an explanation of why this is evidence for a global flood, all laid down at the same time. And it just happens to be the exact same road cut that I did an excavation on for 3.5 days with the the New Mexico Museum of Natural History, and some other people, geologists and paleontologists. Myself, I worked on it with them, and I'm giving a presentation on that Wednesday at the Geological Society of America. So I am really looking forward to doing this video. I've been wanting to do this video for a month now since I did it, but because some of the information I'll be disclosing is it also in the presentation I'm giving at GSA, I couldn't do it. But he missed something. This is let me stop screen sharing here. This is a fairly big thing to miss. If you can see this right here in the layers, this is about every foot to a foot and a half in this whole big, tall road cut. We see these layers about this thick where it had completely dried out. I mean, those are desiccation cracks. This is dried mud, hard, literally hard as a rock. In between that, we have the much softer, thinner layers of shale, real like siltstone, very fine. We actually split these layers thin into butter knives and found nothing but freshwater fossils, trace fossils mostly, pine, conifer fossils, ferns, reptile, amphibian tracks. We pulled 100 fossils out of this cliff in 3 days.
Wow.
And so anyway, I'm looking forward to that video. That one will be coming out in the next 2 weeks now. So I've got that going on. I'm actually going up to the Mogollon Rim tomorrow to collect some samples. Some of the samples I'll be collecting are from them for geological stuff, for geology purposes. There's some layers in there that I'm trying to discover whether they're evaporates. They're really light colored layers, whitish green, and whether it's an evaporate or whether it's from groundwater seepage. And so we'll get that done. I'll include that in my video, but either one of those just destroys his flood theory. And then I've got a thing going on this Sunday where we're doing a family-friendly field trip with the Southwest Paleo Society. Several families signed up, probably 10 to 12 children already. And so we're going to be teaching them about tracks, teaching them about how to make casts and molds of the tracks. I know where almost all of them are, but we're going to I'm going to put them in the right direction and have them go out and find them themselves, so it's going to be really interesting. And they'll get to flag the discovery with one of those little 3x3 flags and call me over to verify it's a track. So I'm just really excited. I've been wanting to do that one for a long, long time and get the kids involved. So
there's a really good question here.
Mm-hmm. Who's it by?
Okay, emotionally stunted.
Oh, on the tetrapods?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
What I've heard, I hear the most bogus. There is no good creationist answer to this. Mostly what they say is the heavier stuff went to the bottom, and the lighter stuff kind of floated at top, and that's why everything is separated the way it
density
is.
Or whatever. But it does not stack up with the evidence at all. Yeah, I don't know how they deal with that. I mean, they just typically change the subject. And ask you a question. But yeah, we don't, you're right. I mean, we see lungfish, like type of ancient lungfish. We got the coelacanth, but that's not in our, it's not quite a tetrapod yet. We got lungfish, the first tetrapods being like Tiktaalik, but we see those appear around 375 million years ago. And we don't see anything in a marine layer that matches up with that. It's just the same. And we see that all throughout the layers. We find the appearance of something new that has features of something that came before it, and also features of something that came later on, which shows how transitional it is.
This is the thing. I could stuff you in blindfold you, stuff you in an airplane, and blindfold you, take you to some random spot in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have the equipment, you'll be able to find the exact layers that are all over the world. It is the same thing.
You won't find what you'll find is we can correlate a layer in Iran possibly with a layer here, but you won't find the same layers in every place because the environment wasn't the same in every place.
And due to the geology,
we find the same layers. We don't find the same layers.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that the sandstone, that maybe there's Aeolian sandstone in Iran, the same age as the Coconino sandstone, but it's not going to contain the same sediment. It's not going to contain the same zircons from the same source or whatever. Because
what I'm saying is that the same periods of time are always there. In other words, you're not going to find a rabbit in with a brontosaurus. It's just not going to happen. It cannot happen. No matter where you go in the world, it's the same as far as that is concerned. All the like groups of animals that lived in a certain period of time, it may not be the same exact species according to the geography of the planet, but you're going to find the same species within the same layers universally.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they are at that particular place or not.
Another comment he's got: no bony fish in the Cambrian. True. I mean, here you've got all these fish that have they're vertebrates that lived at the bottom of the ocean and live at the bottom of the ocean today, the same type of fish, let's say, and they say that things that were at the bottom were buried first. Well, how did it miss all the fish? It just it's crazy. And they can get through one little point sometimes by explaining away this, but when you look at how it fits overall and everything, I mean, we see trilobites at the bottom, but we also see trilobites at up until the Permian extinction. So we see them way up higher in the geological
And
column.
once again, I would invite anyone and everyone to go on to an intelligent design, not even, don't go to Kim Ham, go to just other preachers or whatever who are giving lectures on how the other young earth creationists or the other intelligent design people are wrong. And when they bring up their science, if you're ignorant as I am, looks good. Looks good. It looks plausible. And they don't ever give their references.
Well, some of the ID groups do and stuff, but what I find interesting is that they don't always put their names. You go to the Evolution News and Views site for the ID thing, you have all these articles written, and they'll give references, but they don't list the author of the article itself or whatever. I mean, so why is that? I mean,
if you grew up as I did, completely ignorant, and you're in the mindset of young earth creationists, and you watch these guys, it makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even if you are inclined to research and look at their sources, it's going to be very, very difficult. So what my point is why are young earth creationists? There are a lot of reasons. It's not one reason. It's the same thing with the flat earthers.
Yeah.
I see very, very little difference in the two.
Yeah, I agree there. Same type of argumentation, same type of response.
And the funny thing is the intelligent design people aren't even honest with themselves, because these are biblical literalists, right?
Not necessarily. No, intelligent design. You have people there that aren't even biblical at all. I mean,
right.
they will not name a creator or a designer, I should say. They want to try to say it's scientific by not doing that, but they're implying intervention at every step along the way.
Right. But I guess what I'm referring is to the group that I come from, that are literal biblical literalists. Well, if they were, then they should believe that there's a glass dome in the sky holding the water out, and that the sun and the moon are the same size, and that all the stars and all the cosmos are inside of that firmament, the water casing.
Right.
But you don't hear them making those arguments.
Right. Well, listen, I could go on for another hour probably, but I wanted to keep these down around an hour, a little over. We're over by about 20 minutes, but it's been great talking to you. For some reason, when I put all the information in the video description, initially, whenever I go to end the broadcast and it publishes, it just takes it out anyway. So I will update within the next 15 minutes. I'll have a link to your channel on there, the typical links and everything too. And again, a lot going on. I got one video I'm working on, might get it done this week. I don't know. It depends on when I get home from the trip tomorrow, because Wednesday I'm at the GSA meeting from 9 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. I won't have much time there. I got a lot going on. So anyway, but we'll definitely have this up and edited in the video link description. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. And
David LaDeau, it was great having you on. And check the schedule, everybody, for next week. So we will leave it at that. Thanks again.
All righty. Have a great one.